It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I am Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Richard Matheson's 1954 novel I Am Legend is one of the more influential post-apocalyptic horror novels ever written, but it is itself heavily inspired by another book, The Last Man. The Last Man is an 1826 novel by none other than Frankenstein author Mary Shelley. In that novel, she looks ahead to the late 21st century in a world ravaged by the bubonic plague. But what Matheson took from this was the idea of a soul man immune to the main story's plague. In I Am Legend, it isn't the bubonic plague. Instead, it's an epidemic brought on from a cataclysmic world war. Remember, this was published less than a decade after World War II came to an explosive conclusion with atomic bombs and the later arms race that ramped up very quickly afterwards. But this epidemic would ultimately create zombie-like vampires who stalked the lone man still immune to the virus that turned them. And it's one of the earliest kind of novel instances in which a scientific cause was given to a zombie outbreak or vampiric conditions. This would inspire people like George Romero to make Night of the Living Dead, as well as other creators like Stephen King and Tim Kaine, the producer and lead programmer of the game Fallout. Now, there are also connections often drawn between this and the film 28 Days Later, which will get its own episode in 2 weeks. So I guess, does that mean that it's going to be 42 days later? Whatever. Anyway, this book became popular enough to not see one, but not two, but three adaptations. This was first adapted as 1964's The Last Man on Earth, starring the always great Vincent Price. That movie is very contemplative and almost sad how Price's Dr. Robert Morgan is left mourning humanity as a whole. Now, I talked about the second adaptation on this show, 1971's The Omega Man, which I see as a little bit more of an angry version of the story that seems to almost play off the attitudes that Charlton Heston also held about humanity in Planet of the Apes. That movie also changed what the mutation did to people. They weren't vampires in The Omega Man. They were crazed mutants that end up forming something of a cult. If you weren't part of them, then you had to be destroyed. So they would go around assimilating people into their culture, and then it becomes kind of a religious cult-like thing, and they see Charlton Heston's Robert Neville as kind of an abomination and that needs to be destroyed. But that brings us to this third film adaptation, named for the first time after the actual book, I Am Legend. And it takes elements from both the original book and The Omega Man. In fact, it's actually adapted when you look at like the screenplay credits, it's adapted from both I Am Legend, the novel by Richard Matheson, but also the screenplay for The Omega Man. But this movie brings back the vampires, but changes the cause, which we'll get to in time. Now, this movie was a vehicle for Will Smith, one of the biggest stars of film between the late 90s to really honestly present. Will Smith's original rise to fame was through the world of hip hop as the Fresh Prince with his music partner DJ Jazzy Jeff. He parlayed that into success on TV as the star of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which covered a lot of important social and coming-of-age topics. And in 1996, he was the de facto action hero lead of the summer blockbuster Independence Day. And from there, Will Smith would go on to major successes one after another. Frankly, one of those big, massive box office hits we'll be talking about when we transition to the 90s come this July. But Will Smith's career isn't just box office money. He's been nominated for 3 acting Oscars. The first time for playing Muhammad Ali in 2001's Ali, Then in 2006's The Pursuit of Happiness. And then he finally won Best Actor for 2021's King Richard, a moment that is somewhat marred by that now famous and infamous onstage altercation with Chris Rock not long before being announced the winner of that award. Now, while that is unfortunate for a guy whose career has been mostly known as being a good guy, a guy that a lot of people, regardless of race or regardless of anything, really appreciates and seems to really appeal to. But let's see if we can just dive right into a time that he was indeed a legend. Now, the movie opens with a news report about an advancement in health from Dr. Crippen, played surprisingly by Emma Thompson. It's the only scene that you ever see Emma Thompson. Academy Award winner Emma Thompson is in the opening scene of this movie. And she says that she has effectively cured cancer by way of reverse engineering the measles virus into something that will attack cancer cells as opposed to doing the things that measles do. Now, she had a group of 10,000 people who all underwent the procedure. They're all cured, and she's hailed as a genius, and everything is great. We then transition 3 years later. The year is 2012, and New York City is a complete wasteland. Dr. Robert Neville drives through the city with his dog, Sam, as they search for supplies and search for survivors, and most of the time, if they really want any kind of fresh meat, they're on the hunt for deer that have come into the city now. But as sundown approaches, Robert and Sam have to give up the hunt and return to their home base. There, he makes what he can of his lonely existence. He watches TV from recordings from years past. There are some indication that he was at work on a possible solution to, he was on the cover of Time magazine as a potential savior of humanity. And when the sun goes down, Robert fortifies the building he made a home while the night is spent with these creatures called Dark Seekers shrieking and clawing at, on the outside of his fortification. He has flashbacks to when he evacuated with his wife Zoe and their daughter Marley, with Sam as a puppy. Now, we learn that there is an airborne virus that is threatening all life on the planet, and the president has signed over an executive order to quarantine New York City. Now, Robert is part of the military operation to find a resolution to this issue, but you see, this miracle cure created a new deadly airborne virus called the Crippen virus. It spread incredibly fast, killing 90% of humanity very quickly. The survivors, 1% of which were immune, the rest turned into albino vampiric mutants who basically rule the night, and those are the Dark Seekers. Robert's wife and daughter die during the evacuation, leaving him with only Sam, who is ultimately his only tether to the past life that he had and his only companion in the world for the next 3 years. He spends time testing for a cure on infected rats that he keeps in his basement. And some of his compounds don't kill the virus. Some kill the host. But one compound, compound 6, shows a lot of promise. The rat is no longer aggressive, and its pigment has even begun to return. He spends time basically creating characters around his favorite spots to visit, like the video store in New York City. And so he basically creates these characters by positioning mannequins inside and outside the store. He then talks to them and carries on conversations as if they are his daily, these are the people he sees every day on his route. Every day he sends out a radio message desperately looking for survivors, offering food, shelter, and security, as well as where to find him. And day after day, no one shows up. Now, the first time we see the Dark Seekers for ourselves, Sam has followed a deer into a building infested by the creatures. And Sam and Robert barely escape, but regardless, that compound that seems to show some positive results is ready for a live human trial. So Robert sets up a trap to capture a Dark Seeker to see if he can cure it. And he captures a female Darkseeker and injects her with the compound, but the test initially shows ineffective. And he also notes that their hunger has completely overridden their basic human desire for survival, as he saw earlier a Darkseeker purposely exposing himself to sunlight. And they are becoming less and less human as time goes by. Now, at some point later, Robert and Sam are driving back from the docks, where he tries to meet other survivors, only to see quote-unquote Fred, one of those mannequins that Robert has positioned near his favorite video store, standing alongside the road. And it's clearly been moved by someone or something. And it is indeed a trap similar to what he set for the Darkseeker that he took home. And he wakes up at twilight with Sam still dutifully barking beneath him in this trap. And he cuts himself free, but in doing so, when he fell to the ground, his knife goes into his leg, requiring him to more or less crawl slowly back to his truck as the sun continues to set. A seemingly highly intelligent Darkseeker releases infected dogs to attack them, and in the fight with the dogs, Sam is bitten. Robert tries to save her, but ultimately he has to kill her as she starts to show signs of this change into an infected creature. Things at this point are not good for old Robert. He's losing his touch on reality. He's more lonely than he's ever felt, and he's just seemingly in a daze. He also wants revenge on a nearly suicidal death wish. And, he is basically running various Darkseekers over with his truck. He's out past dark, which is not good. He's nearly killed by the same more advanced Alpha Darkseeker when he's suddenly saved by a pair of people, Anna and the child Ethan. They both survived the outbreak initially. They are immune, and they were originally on a Red Cross boat in Sao Paulo. And they came to New York from Maryland after hearing Robert's AM radio broadcast. See, it's more important than ever to save AM radio, people. But she tells Robert that they are headed to New Bethel in Vermont, where she's heard word of a safe zone full of uninfected people. And he tells her that doesn't exist and lashes out, telling her that everyone is dead. And he even breaks it down further by saying that the virus killed 90% of the entire human race in a blink of an eye. 1% was immune, but that means the other 9% turned into Darkseekers and then fed on the immune. They are grossly outnumbered from the start, let alone now, and that everyone they have ever known is dead. And Robert is very clearly losing his hope for humanity, ultimately. But when things calm down, he still doesn't want to leave for Vermont with Ethan and Anna. He says that he can still fix what's happened. This is his post. This is ground zero. This is where he is meant to be to try to solve this problem. And he continues to work on that female Darkseeker to see if he can cure her. He uses ice to chill her body temperature to see if that increases the effectiveness of the compound. But that night, the Alpha Darkseeker, whose mate Robert has in his basement, decides to attack Robert's house for retribution on Robert's attack the night before. The Alpha Darkseeker gets into the house along with a couple of his other vampire mutant buddies, and with his fortress basically broken open, Robert, Anna, and Ethan escape to the basement lab. And to their surprise, Robert's female subject is turning back into a human. The compound works. And as the Darkseekers attempt to break in to get to them, Robert pleads with them that he can save them all, but the Darkseekers seem completely and totally uninterested in being saved. And Robert realizes now that he needs to give Anna a sample of the cured woman's blood to take to Vermont for study. And Robert sacrifices himself by putting Anna and Ethan and the sample of the cure into the coal chute in the basement, and then he blows up his lab, himself, and the Darkseekers with a grenade. Sometime later, Anna and Ethan arrive in New Bethel, Vermont at an encampment that is indeed walled off and full of survivors and the immune. She hands over the sample form of the blood from Robert Neville, who she tells about all his unending efforts to save humanity, making him now a legend that will ultimately be seen as the savior of what remains of the human race. So let's talk about 3 things I like about I Am Legend. First, I'm kind of a sucker for movies set in cities that are supposed to be highly populated, like a New York City, but are completely and totally barren. Now, I know it's partly backlot or other movie magic or just sectioning off parts of town to film in. But I sometimes also ask, when I see this in older movies in particular, how do they do that? How do they get rid of all those people? And how do they make it look like it's not been lived in for years? But whether it is something like The Walking Dead or something like this, I always love seeing those bustling cities completely emptied out, and ultimately nature taking it back with weeds growing up all over the place, and the buildings just kind of naturally getting rickety and decrepit on their own. Next, this story requires whoever is cast as the lead to be able to carry the whole damn thing basically alone. You can't make this movie with someone who can't display some sort of charisma. You have to have someone who's acting in his environment and not directly acting at you, the audience. So you can have someone talk to you or at you, and sometimes that can work out if somebody's looking down the barrel of the camera or clearly making it sound like he is saying things or doing things for the benefit of the person watching. But for this type of story, and I mean, not just type of story, this story in particular, you really need to have someone who can act naturally in the environment in a natural manner. The 3 times the story has been made, each time they had a lead actor who could do just that. Vincent Price monologues about as well as any other actor ever. Charlton Heston plays the loner very well. And Will Smith is a guy that you can really kind of feel a friendship with. He's soft enough to be your friend and protector. He's also hard enough to actually intelligently protect you, and seemingly is focused on trying to save humanity. His mission is not done. The war may be over, but his mission isn't done. I mean, he's really good in this movie. He's actually great in this movie. And I can't think of anyone else in this period in terms of the kind of lead Hollywood actor that Warner Brothers would have wanted for this movie that really could have fit this any better than him at this kind of mid 2000s point. And lastly, I think anyone who has seen this movie or knows anything about it knows what this is going to be. This movie had something different than the other versions. I mean, there's a legitimate second character with our protagonist for 2/3 of this movie. Yeah, of course, it's Sam the dog, played by 2 German shepherds named Abby and Kona. This was one of those movies that calls out a legitimate argument that maybe animal actors, or maybe just their trainers, need some sort of recognition from either the Oscars or some other prestigious academy or organization. But as much as you love how well this dog acts along with Will Smith, and as absolutely heartbreaking as it is, one of the things that makes this movie stand out from all of the versions of this movie is that climactic scene in which Sam is bitten. And you really do feel every single emotion that Robert is as he tries to save this last piece of his life before the virus ultimately destroyed humanity. I mean, you hope beyond all reasonable hope that Robert can save her, but when you realize that he can't, and she starts to transform into one of the infected, it's not just that he has to put her down, but because of how they're situated and his own injury, he has to strangle her to death. Because, she starts to change in his arms, and he has to strangle her. He doesn't have time to get a gun or to get, any other kind of euthanization tool. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to have to do it in such a way. And on top of that, of course, like I said, it's the last thing he has of his family and his old life. It's just a hard scene. And the whole movie up to this point was Sam and Robert living this well-practiced and well-organized survivalist life. And part of his own coping mechanism allowed him to drop his guard and to be tricked by this. And that led to, him being captured, and it led to this loss that's both hard on his character and on us as the audience. I mean, it really does add something different to this version compared to the others. In The Last Man on Earth, Morgan's own hope for a future is turned against him by another group that is somewhere between humanity and the vampires and seeking their own salvation. In The Omega Man, Robert Neville's own desire for a woman and a family is used against him. Here, it's not a human that this Robert Neville holds on to, but the last thing his family gave to him was their puppy, because his daughter thought she would keep him safe from the quote unquote monsters. This is not anything being turned against him in this final climax, but the end of a second act that puts him in his lowest point, because he has no more tether to a former normalcy at that moment. I mean, it's just great, and really tells you that if you've seen each one of these 3 different versions of this story as a movie, you've gotten something pretty different from each one. And it's just a heartbreaking scene when he has to put Sam down, but Sam is such a great actor as a dog. And it's just one of the things that most people remember about this movie. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com, but don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday morning Film Seizure podcast and the Monday afternoon Monster Monday show at your favorite podcast providers. We also upload the stuff to YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next week, let's do a little spelunking in the Appalachian Mountains, where we'll have to deal with some creepy crawlers in 2005's The Descent. And until next week, stay spooky.